дико я shiny, пару лямов money on my neck of money rain.
It's my name, это мой money rain, no pain, no gain, иди нахуй Monday. The raise my name, ра-та-та, bang, bang, заряжай, бляха, моя baby mother. It's my name, это мой money.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the second part of What If Rias, Akeno, Issei enter Attack on Titan. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of Reading Dangerously on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. What is wrong? Akeno asked as she set the cup of tea before her king. We're going to the underworld for the summer, Rias said as if that explained everything. Which it didn't. I am aware, Akeno nodded and set another cup down for Kiba, who thanked her and took her seat on the clubroom couch. Kaneko was nibbling on some cookies beside her, her middle school uniform getting covered in crumbs that the queen got rid of with a wave of her hand. I know things are tense with your parents, but seeing them again should still be nice. It has been a year. HM? Oh, yeah, I guess it will, Rias answered distractedly as she bit her lower lip, deep in thought. Are you worried about our contracts? Akeno asked, trying to puzzle out what had the young woman so distracted. I have already alerted my regulars to the disruption in service. I did as well, Kiba nodded with a smile at Akeno as he put his tea down to chime in. Me too. No, Rias hurried to wave her hands in dismissal. I trust you all to be responsible. I have also talked with Gasper, and he's prepared for the trip. It's not you all I am worried about. So she was worried about someone but not one of her peerage. The only other people in the school she knew well were Sona and her peerage, and Akeno doubted there was anything to be worried about there. Which left, are you afraid to leave your boyfriend alone for so long? Akeno teased her best friend. Akeno, it's not like that, Rias protested. So you say? But you and Sona do spend so much time with him. Rivals of love, what a scandalous master I have, Akeno kept up, delighting in the way Ria's face started to match her hair. Akeno's preferences and proclivities were no secret among the peerage, and she could drop the Yamato Nichiko act in the safety of the clubroom. Her words weren't solely to tease Rias either. The idea of two devil heiresses fighting over an injured, weak human tickled her romantic sense, and the concept of Rias coming in and trying to steal a man from her rival, like a seductive mistress, was in line with Akeno's fetishes. Eren is a friend, Rias insisted with a pout as she crossed her arms. A good one. He doesn't know anything about me, or the supernatural, or the Gremory. There is nothing romantic about it. He doesn't even know what I look like. Just because he can't see you doesn't mean you can't show him what you look like, Akeno chirped happily, and Rias tilted her head in confusion at her queen's words. Taking a cue from the videos she had been watching, Akeno lowered her voice into a sensual purr as she ran a hand down her body. You just have to get hands-on. Physical. Akeno. Phew, the seductive act fell away as the young woman giggled, a hand covering her mouth as her king gaped at her, face flushed with embarrassment. But you are worried about him, right? Kiba asked his floundering king, aware that the two young women would continue for hours if he let them to it. He and Kaneko had never officially met the older boy, but had been told about him. They had also read his file and occasionally saw him on his bench when they moved through the park behind their club building. Both me and Sona will be gone for weeks. Rias took the opportunity to shift the topic away from an embarrassing subject. He'll be completely alone. He will be fine, Akeno tried to reassure her king, giving up her teasing for the moment. Despite his condition, he is very competent, and the wards will protect him while he's on the grounds. I know that, Rias said with a huff. I'm leaving my familiar behind just in case, but he should be safe. Then what are you worried about? He'll be bored, Rias answered as if it was obvious. Without Sona or me, he's going to be lonely. I've been trying to figure out what to leave behind to help him. Sona will leave behind study material for him, Akeno pointed out. If there was one thing they could trust the Citri to do, it was to give her special student summer homework. But that's boring, Rias whined. Sona needs to let him have fun, too. I just can't decide what to leave him. Definitely a few drama CDs, but which ones? And should I leave an anime behind? Just because he can't see it doesn't mean he can't enjoy it. We haven't started one yet. I've been hesitating, but do you think he'd like to listen to one, or is it too soon? And this is what has you chewing on your pen? Kiba asked, his ordinarily suave smile slightly pained. Of course, Rias said with pride. There are a lot of things to consider when making recommendations. It can't be anything war-related, obviously. But Eren doesn't like just slice of life either. It needs to be able to catch his interest. It also cannot be something wholly new that we haven't gone through together, or he won't understand it. Context matters a lot in enjoying anime. He's still learning Japanese, which leaves only a few options that will interest him, but are at a low enough level to not hurt his head. Akeno smiled as her king went through the listing of drama CDs she had already chosen. Why and how it was not nearly enough to cover all the time they would be gone for, and how she wanted him to have options if some of her listings didn't click with him. She suspected Eren didn't care for manga or light novels as much as Rias did and just put up with them for Rias' sake. If nothing else, she was happy that erenyeager was here for Rias. The heiress needed someone like him in her life. Someone who didn't see her as a king, heiress, source of influence, or potential rival for power and prestige. Someone who saw her as Rias' Gremory, not Rias of the Gremory. Which made his inevitable death all the sadder. Who are you? Eren asked as she took a seat on the bench. How he could spend all day on the uncomfortable thing, Akeno had no idea. Hajime Akeno, she answered politely. A pleasure to meet you. What do you want, Hajime Akeno? I am here to talk to you as Rias' Gremory's best friend. Akeno kept her voice unfailingly polite despite Eren's rough words. She didn't hold it against him. The situation hadn't been the same, but she had been where he was before. Distrustful and suspicious of everyone who approached. You might not believe me. Rias has mentioned you, Eren cut her off. I was asking why you were here now. You should be in class. Akeno bit her tongue before the caustic remark could escape at his rudeness. She had to remind herself that despite knowing about him for months and seeing him a dozen or so times, this was the first time they had officially met. All he would know of her was from whatever Rias told him, but he had never met her. I needed to speak with you, Akeno said instead, her voice still gentle, kind, and polite. Thank you for worrying, but my grades will not suffer from one missed class. Eren's lips quirked down for an instant, his hand briefly tightening on his cane, but he remained silent, letting her explain herself. As I said, Akeno said gently, I am here because of Rias. We will be leaving for the summer, returning home to see her family. I know, Eren repeated, his empty hand gesturing toward a bag leaning against his feet. She and Sauna told me. Gave me all this stuff this morning before class since they're leaving this afternoon. We've already said goodbye, so if that is all. I'm afraid it isn't. I won't take too much of your time, I promise. Once again, Eren's hand twitched on his cane. Once more, he kept silent, and Akeno continued to the main subject. I wish to inquire about your plans for Rias. What do you mean? Eren asked, fully frowning in her general direction now. I simply wish to ask what your intentions are for her. And Sauna, but I am mostly here for Rias. Is this you telling me to stay away from her? That she's too good for me? Eren sarcastically asked, completely unimpressed. No, I don't intend anything like that, Akeno hurried to say while staying polite. I am happy that you are friends with them. Truly, I am. I would not wish to deprive them of you, nor you of them. Then what? Eren's voice was even harsher now, as if fed up with talking to her. Akeno paused, trying to think of a way to say it delicately. Eren caught her hesitation and didn't let it slide. Spit it out. You're dying, Akeno whispered gently, politely, and regretfully. Eren didn't react negatively to her words as she feared. He just tilted his head slightly to the side in a minute gesture, as if asking her, so what? It obvious to those who saw you a few months ago and see you now, Akeno kept her voice soft and kind. She was genuinely sympathetic for the boy despite his abrasive tone toward her. Despite spending so much time in the sun, you've gotten paler. You must have lost at least 10 pounds. You walk slower, and it has only been half a year since you first arrived. You can't have long left. I'll die at 19. It was said so casually and matter-of-factly that a shiver ran down Akeno's spine. There was no bitterness in his voice. No resignation. Eren was just stating a fact. I'm sorry. Don't be, Eren frowned at her again. It's not your fault. And there is nothing you can do. There is no cure money can buy. We all die. I've already lived a lot longer than I should have. Still, it's not fair, foe. Life's not fair, Eren cut her off again. It's never fair. It is as cruel as it is beautiful. Only children and naive idiots don't recognize that. But you're so young, Akeno tried to say, but Eren continued speaking over her. It is not about the length of our lives. It is about the amount of living we do in them. And I've lived enough for 2 lifetimes. The devil-fallen hybrid was getting sick of being interrupted, but she contained her annoyance. She was the one who had come to see him and brought up such a personal topic, after all. While that is an admirable and mature way to view things, Akeno kept her polite and gentle tone despite her frustration. As I mentioned, I am here for Rias, and she will not see things that way. She is a very caring girl and has never lost anyone. I just worry that. This time, the reincarnated devil trailed off instead of being interrupted, letting Eren fill in the blanks. That I am going to break her heart when I die, Eren said plainly. Yes, Akeno said regretfully. She did feel bad for the boy. He had never asked for any of this. His past may be filled with violence, but it didn't seem like he had done anything to deserve to die so young. On top of that, she knew she was being a bit unreasonable, asking him to put Ria's happiness above his own when they had only known each other for half a year. In some small way, she was also grateful for him. Not only was he a friend Rias needed, but he also turned down the opportunity, unknowingly, to be reincarnated as a devil. Rias could not afford to have a weak peerage, not with so much on the line. Her reincarnating a sick and dying boy, with no magic or sacred gear, out of pity might make her parents decide to push the marriage ahead, despite the promise to wait until she was in university. And even if it didn't, with her dreams regarding the raiding games, Eren would forever be a chain around her neck. As it was, Akeno still wasn't sure Rias would let him pass on peacefully. That was what she was truly worried about. That the redhead, unable to handle the loss of her friend, would try and bring him back. It would not only cost her a peace she couldn't afford to lose, but there was every probability that Eren would resent Rias for it. It would be acceptable, if slightly regrettable, if Rias wasted a valuable evil piece to save a friend whose only contribution to the team was combat experience. It would be a tragedy if that friend came to hate her for it. Already, the Gremory and Citri agents were combing the globe for any magical or mundane solution to Eren's disease, and they had only known him for a few months. Akeno did not want their friendship, so sweet and enviable, to be tainted by regret and hatred. I am not asking you to stop seeing them, or stop being friends with them, or even to stop coming here, Akeno explained gently. I just ask that you do not tell them when it is time. You can leave a message, a will, or anything, and I'd be happy to pass it along afterwards. I just don't want them to have to watch you die. It is a terrible thing to see someone you are close to die in front of you. Perhaps Eren heard the way her voice hitched, her mask of prim and proper composure lifting slightly as memories of her mother's murder flashed before her mind. His face eased from his frown for the first time since she sat down. You don't have to worry about that. His voice softened as he leaned back against the bench and turned his head skyward. I doubt we will still be friends then. You do not know Rias as well as I do. She is a very greedy girl. I have never seen her let anyone go once she latches on. It doesn't matter. It does. I will die alone. Another shiver ran down Akeno's spine at the absolute certainty in his voice. If the earlier statement had been a prediction, then this was a prophecy. Akeno felt a deep sadness well up in her as she realized what it meant. How he knew exactly when he would die. What he would do. Erenyeager would die alone, and nothing anyone said would change his mind. In his own terrible way, he'd control how he died. Akeno did not have the right to criticize how someone chose their end. I understand, Akeno said gently as she rose from her seat. I will not bother you anymore. Goodbye. Eren grunted in dismissal. That was the final straw. Akeno had bothered him, yes, but she had also been polite, kind, and gentle. She hadn't asked him anything onerous or insulting. She had done everything in her power to be as unobtrusive as possible. And in return? She had been rudely questioned, been cut off repeatedly, and now, instead of simply saying goodbye, he was trying to dismiss her with a grunt? She could have accepted his refusal. She could accept his scorn. She could even accept his resentment for her unreasonable demand. Akeno had prepared herself for that when she approached. But she could not accept blatant disregard. Hajime Akeno might pretend to be a prime and proper Yamato Nichiko, the ideal Japanese demure beauty, but deep down, she was rotten to her core. He wanted her gone? Too bad for him. Oh, one final thing, if you don't mind, Akeno said sweetly as she retook her seat on the uncomfortable bench. What? Eren asked bluntly, obviously put out by her return. I just wish to ask if you have some issues with me. You have been quite rude since I arrived. Though Eren couldn't see the smile directed his way, any observer would have noticed it was not a kind one. I don't like you. May I ask why? A bit surprised at his bluntness, Akeno was genuinely curious about the source of his dislike. Had Rias pranked her by telling bad stories about her to the man? Your damn voice is pissing me off. My voice? Akeno asked in confusion, not put off by his swearing. I am afraid I cannot help the voice I was born with. And I admit, I have been told I have a lovely singing voice before, so I do not know what aggravates you. It's so fake, Eren snarled. The outburst of anger reared its head from almost nowhere as his hands tightened on his cane in frustration. So damn fake, it's pissing me off. Too damn polite, too damn nice. Just say what you really feel, damn it. Swear if you want to swear. Insult me if you want to. Scream if you want to scream. Just stop trying to be someone you are not. Stunned by his short rant, Akeno said nothing for a few seconds. What did Rias tell you about me? She was getting back at her king for this. She didn't have to, Eren bit out. I knew someone like you. For years, she pretended to be someone she wasn't, trying to be liked by everyone. I couldn't stand her then, but at least I could avoid her. You came to me. And I am too old to put up with it again. I don't care how you act around others, but if you want to talk to me, you better leave that fake shit behind, or I am going to punch you. The idea of erenyeager, blind and sickly human, trying to punch her, a devil-fallen hybrid that could kill him with a twitch of the finger, was so absurd that Akeno couldn't help herself. Phew, Akeno giggled. If you can hit me, I will reward you. The way her voice dipped low hinted at the nature of the reward. I am usually an S, but I always wanted to try being an M. As she teased him, she went over their short conversation in their head. He had been wary at first, but hadn't been hostile until she deliberately tried to be gentle and polite, knowing what she was asking would be rude. It wasn't politeness or kindness that bothered him. Sona spoke formally as well, and Rias was almost entirely too kind. In only 3 sentences, without ever seeing her, erenyeager had understood Akeno Hajime better than most of her peers ever did. No wonder Sona was so intrigued. Rather than blush, fidget, or continue to be angry, Eren simply sagged against the bench in relief. Much better, he sighed. Akeno blinked owlishly at the boy. Sure, he couldn't see her, but her voice was sensual enough that he should have gotten the hint. Either he didn't care for women, had more experience than she expected, or... Once more, the sadness and sympathy welled up within Akeno. She supposed it was too much to expect a boy, even one at that age, going through what he was to not have hormonal issues. I wasn't lying about being concerned for Rias, Akeno diverted the topic back from less sensitive grounds as quickly as possible. It would be best if we could find a cure for what you are going through. Then my worries will be pointless. Whoops. She hadn't meant to let the fact that they were even looking for a cure slip out. As far as Akeno knew, Eren had yet to learn of the resources Sona and Rias could call to hand. To him, they were just helpful young women, his friends who sat and talked with him. She also didn't want to give him false hope. Devils were famously bad at healing magic. There is no cure. Eren thankfully didn't seem to catch on to the hint as he spoke with indifference about his impending doom. I was born with a time limit. I will not live to see 20. I do not regret living my life. It was necessary. Now I am just waiting for the meeting I was promised. That is a mature way to look at it, Akeno hedged, her voice less polite and more dissatisfied. It was fine to look at one's mortality philosophically, but he was casual about it that it angered her. Eren shot her a look, lost under the bandages, but the frown was back, so she spoke her thoughts directly. But death is not just about the dead, it is about those left behind. Sauna will miss you. Rias will miss you. You should not belittle their care. You lost someone. It was not a question. The light note of sympathy in his voice and her knowledge of his own experiences gave Akeno the push she needed to share a bit more than she would usually. My mother. She was killed when I was a girl. Ria's family took me in after they found me. Losing a parent is. Eren was clearly searching for the right words but came up blank. Yeah, Akeno sighed, not blaming his silence. It was unfair to expect Eren, who never knew his parents, to be able to understand what she had felt when her mother had been murdered before her eyes. Because of her. Because Akeno Haimejima's birth had been a mistake. The conversation lulled. Both teens on the bench caught up in their memories. In the end, since she was already missing class, Akeno decided to use the time to get to know Eren better before leaving with the rest of the peerage this afternoon. Tell me about the girl. HM? The one I remind you of. The one you don't like. I didn't like her, Eren corrected softly, the rage gone and leaving the void it had once filled. By the end, she was probably the third closest person to me. Oh ho, Akeno tittered. How close did you ever? No, Eren said simply. So much was packed into that short word that Akeno decided to not push. So far, this conversation had not gone her way at all. She got the feeling most of her usual tactics to get under people's skin would not work on erenyeager. Akeno did always enjoy a challenge. Do you want to help me play a little joke on Rias? She asked, trying to talk about a less dour topic. If asking questions wouldn't get her answers, she would have to evaluate how he handled himself in other situations. Just because it didn't look like Eren had a funny bone in his body didn't mean he couldn't help. Maybe this would even get him to smile. One way or another, Akeno would break the older boy's calm. On Rias, he asked. Akeno nodded, realized what she was doing, and answered in the affirmative instead. I don't mind. The last time I played a prank was training? He trailed off as if asking himself a question. Akeno filed that away and kept going. You know Rias thinks you're an anime protagonist, right? When we return, you just need to say a few words to her. Eren tilted his head in confusion, looking in her direction. That he was facing slightly to her left didn't bother Akeno as she slowly wove her prank on her best friend. It would be over a month before it paid off, but it would be worth it. By the time she explained her idea and gave him his lines, it was almost time for her to meet with the rest of the Gremory peerage to head to the underworld. You are a worse person than I thought, Eren sighed as she stood up. It won't hurt her, Akeno assured. She'll love it. After a while. You know her more than I do, Eren gave an ambivalent shrug. I do have a question. Of course. What is anime? Akeno blinked owlishly at the boy, unable to understand how one could spend months being friends with Rias Gremory without knowing what anime was. Then again, hadn't Rias just said she was hesitating about introducing Eren to one? Had she never even mentioned it to not burden Eren with knowledge of what he was missing? Had Akeno just unknowingly blundered through her king's well-intentioned consideration? And more importantly, how do you explain anime to the blind? With difficulty, Akeno realized in the following hour as she tried to explain a visual medium to the blind boy on the bench. Eren, we're back, Rias cheerfully greeted her friend as she sat on the uncomfortable bench. Rias, Eren nodded at her, but tilted his head in question in his usual expressionless manner. Sometimes, he reminded her so much of Kaneko that Rias decided that waiting for her rook to enter high school was entirely too long before introducing the two. Who else is with you? I am here as well, Sona said as she approached at a much more sedate pace. She slightly adjusted her glasses, making them glint ominously as she glared at her rival. Rias stuck her tongue out at the student council president. Sona chose to be the bigger woman. Metaphorically. Either she'd hit her growth spurt and gain her sisters, assets, or she wouldn't and would grow up to be a beauty like her aunt. Either way, Sona didn't need to compete on such a base level. Or so she told herself. I trust your summer was enjoyable. What progress have you made with the lesson discs I left for you? Rather than let Eren answer the boring question, Rias started speaking again. I also brought Akeno. Hello? She asked me to introduce you. Good afternoon, Eren nodded in the direction Akeno had spoken from and tried to greet her in Japanese. It is a pleasure to meet you. The pronunciation was correct, but the accent was off. Still, it was enough to get Sona to congratulate him. I see you have been practicing, she nodded with evident approval. Now that you have the syllabary order down and some basic vocabulary, we will work on sentence structure and conjugation while increasing your word pool. By the end of the year, I want to be able to practice with some simple test conversations. But you don't have to worry about it right now, Rias hurried to add, sending a light glare of her own at Sona. Akeno is fluent in English like us. Thank you, Eren nodded at them both. Or at least tried to. Instead of nodding at Rias and Sona, he faced Akeno and a nearby tree. Have you been out here all day? Rias asked, a note of worry in her voice as she looked around the wooded park, just now realizing how hot the August afternoon really was. For a devil, it wasn't a significant concern. But for Eren? Should we head into the shade? I brought a picnic. Kyoto didn't get as hot as some parts of Japan, but leaving someone to sit in the sun for hours on end was in no way safe. The tree leaves blocked a lot of the direct glare, but Eren was already sickly. Rias was worried about heat stroke. I am fine, Eren shook his head in denial. Heat doesn't bother me. You're burning up, Rias insisted as she hurried to grab his hand, not holding his cane. Come on, my club is near here. You can cool off inside. Don't worry, he said as he lightly shook off her hand. I run a few degrees hotter than most. It's true, Sona agreed. He felt warm even months ago, and it was spring. Rias gave her rival another glare as Akeno looked at the citri in delight. Ah, I just mean when I touched him, it was warm. Just his hands. Sona lightly flushed and fidgeted under the Grammary's glower and Akeno's widening smile. But I do think the park furniture could do with an update. I will discuss it at the school's next budget meeting. It was a transparent ploy to change the subject, and everyone knew it. We should be able to replace all the benches with more mod. No. Eren's one word stopped Sona's voice in her tracks. Excuse me, Sona said with a frown. She wasn't one to tolerate people being rude. Just because this was the first time Eren had done so didn't mean she would allow it to slide. The boy wasn't what she would consider polite, nor was he outright rude. He was just rough around the edges, unaware of the social niceties due to his upbringing. Sona willfully ignored the fact that even if Eren knew how to be polite, he would still choose not to be unless it was someone he respected. Not this bench, Eren insisted, not cowed in any way by Sona's harsh tone. If you want to change the others, go right ahead. Not this one. Why? Rias asked instead of Sona. It's really uncomfortable, the spot isn't good, and you're exposed to the elements. I've seen you sit out here in the rain. You can't keep doing that in your condition, even with an umbrella. Winter is coming, too. We even get snow here in Kyoto. We can replace the bench with a full sitting booth. There'd be more room, and you'd be safer. Not this bench, Eren repeated, stressing every word. He would not be budged on the subject. It's comfortable to me, and the elements don't bother me as much as other people. I've dealt with worse. Why is this bench special? Sona asked, trying to get why he was being so obstinate about a bench, of all things. It is important to me, Eren said, and none of the young women there were happy with that answer. But then he continued, I met you here on it, didn't I? Oh, Rias said softly, her face flushing softly as she twiddled with a strand of her hair. I suppose, Sona coughed and cleared her throat as she looked everywhere but at Eren, pretending as if her own cheeks were not pinking. If we simply installed a retractable covering and maybe a heater for winter, it would accomplish the same goals. It is not as if Kyoto is hurting for funds. This sentimentality from Eren was utterly new, but it was nice. Akeno watched it all in undisguised glee. So cute. But the best was yet to come if Eren remembered the plan she had proposed before the break. Thankfully, he did. "Since you are both here, I was hoping I could ask you a favor," Eren said in silence after Sona's words. His voice was as without inflection as it usually was, but this was the first time he had asked for anything, so both young women paid close attention. "If it is within our power," Sona hedged gently, knowing not to make any promises before hearing all the details, "we'll do it." Rias, of course, didn't have such worries with her friends. "And Akeno will help." "If I can," the queen said gently, hiding her smile behind her hand as her eyes lit up with mischief. "I am looking for 2 girls. They should live in the area and are a few years younger than me." "What are their names?" Sona frowned. If they lived here, there was a good chance they were QO students, in which case she would know them. But it wasn't guaranteed. Their school had stringent admission requirements, so they might have gone to a different school in the area. "I don't know their names," Eren admitted with a shrug, his voice still plain and without inflection, as if talking about the weather. "I met them when they were younger. I was only 10, and they never gave me their names. I only recently found out they lived in QO." "So, they moved here?" Rias asked, and Eren nodded. "That would narrow it down considerably. Can you give us any hint or description we can work with? And why are you looking for them?" "You shouldn't have trouble finding them," Eren shrugged. His voice was bland, almost deadpan. "They were cute when I met them. I imagine they are only more beautiful now." Both Rias and Sona frowned but let him talk. One of them had bright blue eyes and crimson hair, so she should stand out in a crowd. Rias froze. The other had black hair, so it will be slightly harder. But her eyes were the most beautiful amethyst you will ever see, and she wore glasses. Sona froze. "I promised to marry them when we got older, but I doubt they remember me. Still, I have to try." Silence. Absolute silence filled the little park path after Eren's declaration. Then Akeno broke. "Ah-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha," she laughed uproariously, doubling over to hold her stomach in an entirely unladylike fashion. If any students had been around to see her mad burst of laughter, her reputation as a Yamato Nachiko would have disappeared overnight. "Your faces, ah-ha-ha-ha-ha, oh, Satans, your faces." "No," Rias bit out through clenched teeth. Her face was so red it almost eclipsed her hair. Part of it was anger, but a larger part was absolute mortification. Rias. Sona, by contrast, was cold in her anger. "Deal with her. 10,000 spankings, don't hold back." "You-fu-fu-fu-fu," Akeno lewdly giggled. "Don't threaten me with a good time." Rias lunged at her queen, who danced out of the way with more giggles. As the pair ran through the park, laughing and growling in turn, Sona took Ria's vacant seat on the bench. Her face was still flushed, which Eren thankfully could not see, and her heart was racing. "That was quite cruel," Sona said harshly as she calmed herself down. "It was Akeno's idea," Eren explained plainly, utterly unperturbed by either her tone or the joke. "She visited before you left for the summer and asked for my help with a prank. I am guessing the 2 women she talked about were you too?" "We can be described as such, yes," Sona coughed gently into her fist, cheeks flushing again at the memory. "In case you were curious, Rias is the one with red hair. I am the one, the other." "Damn it, Akeno," Sona cursed inwardly. Talking to Eren had never been awkward before, but even now, she couldn't help the slight stutter in her voice. "Do not be too hard on her," Eren sighed softly, as if reading her thoughts. "I shall be," Sona denied simply. "This is far from the first time she has pulled something like this. Rias lets her get away with too much. And do not think I have forgotten your part in this little joke. If you have such free time to go along with frivolities that toy with a young maiden's heart, then you have time for twice the homework. I shall revise our lesson plans." "If you wish," her first student nodded, unbothered by her threat. Something about the way he was handling this unnerved the young heiress. "Why did you go along with her?" Sona asked, genuinely curious why the usually serious boy decided to go along with something so whimsical. "I thought it was a good idea." Eren couldn't see it, but Sona frowned at him. She did not understand how playing with her feelings was a good idea. "I fail to see how it is so." The joke was in poor taste. Eren paused for a moment, Then he seemed to slump slightly, and his following words came out not in his usual monotone, but in a nostalgic, almost regretful tone. "A word of caution," he said gently. "A dream is a beautiful thing. Pursuing yours is admirable. But do not forget to live. Do not forget to laugh with your friends, or cry, or rage. Someday, you might not be able to anymore. All you will have remaining are the memories of those times together. It will be all that pushes you forward." Sona fought back the shiver she felt at the sheer blankness of his voice, even knowing he wouldn't see it. She knew she was incredibly lucky. Wealth, power, family, friends, a peerage supporting her, and a dream she pursued. Hell, Sona had recently gotten out of her arranged marriage, while Rias still had hers hanging over her head. Looking at the man beside her, who had only a few years left to live, no family, and had given up all his wealth, Sona knew she had no right to complain about a prank between friends. It also drew something to her attention she hadn't noticed before. Eren looked worse than she remembered. His clothes hung from a frame that looked skinnier than before. Despite sitting in the sun for hours, his skin was a shade lighter than she remembered. And he had spent the last month alone. Every day, sitting on an uncomfortable bench, with no one for company but their hidden familiars. An unfamiliar and unwelcome emotion rose in Sona's chest as she looked at her student and friend. Rather than give voice to it or continue criticizing the boy for the prank, she turned to another subject. "Your hair is getting too long," she chided gently, grabbing a long strand of dark hair that fell to below his chest and pushing it out of his face. "You should get it cut as soon as possible. A tidy appearance helps maintain a tidy mindset." Eren didn't say anything, just giving her a weary nod. A sound had Sona pulling her hand away as if she had been scalded by the brown locks. "Yufufufu," Akeno giggled at the sight, her uniform and hair disheveled from the chase, but unharmed otherwise. "How cute." "You're in my seat," Rias said with a pout and a glare at her rival as she crossed her arms in displeasure. She was also disheveled and had a twig in her red hair, but seemed more concerned with Sona's placement than anything else. "Hem," Sona coughed softly in her hand, acting as if nothing had happened. She did not get up. "Since Eren asked, I will not be harsh with your punishment, Akeno." The reincarnated devil looked at the young man in surprise as Sona continued. "You will join the student council every night for 2 weeks to aid us. There is a lot of work to be done after the summer. This will be on top of your usual duties. I trust this is agreeable, Rias?" "You took my seat," Rias repeated, still pouting, but nodded. "Fine. She can lose some free time." "Ah," Akeno gasped dramatically, raising a hand to her forehead to feign a faint. "What a cruel mistress I have, sold off to slave away for another. You will save me, won't you, Eren?" Perfectly timed and without any tonal inflection, Eren answered. "No." "Ha! PFFT." Even as Rias crowed in triumph, pointing a finger at her queen, Sona desperately covered her mouth to try and cover up the sound of her snort escaping from between clenched lips. Everyone turned to the citri, though Eren's facing was slightly off. There was a beat of silence as everyone digested what had just happened. "Yufufufufufu," Akeno's giggles gained further fervor as she watched the normally stoic young woman turn red for the second time today. "How cute!" "Rias," Sona snapped at her rival, who was staring at her like she was seeing a ghost. "Didn't you say you brought a picnic? Let's eat." It took another 5 minutes for Rias to bring out the picnic basket she had brought, and Sona had to give up her seat to do it, but the 4 teens eventually settled into a light meal. Eren and Rias sat on the bench while Sona and Akeno contented themselves to rest on the blanket in the grass. In the afternoon sun of a small park, the 3 childhood friends ate and talked about their summer and plans for the coming semester. They laughed, teased, and enjoyed a moment of freedom. Freedom from their responsibilities, their pasts, and the worries of their futures. The young boy sat on the bench through it all, eating lightly and listening to them. He rarely joined in their talk, though they tried to include him when they could. He was content to simply be there on that bench. Eren's mind wandered to memories far away and long ago. Erenyeager never smiled. Even surrounded by laughter, that didn't change. Even if all 3 girls there would swear, his expression eased more than they had ever seen. But if, while listening and remembering, Eren dozed into one of his habitual naps, none of the young women with him tried to wake him. And if, while sleeping, he saw 3 children running to a tree on a hill, Erenyeager never smiled. But the boy in the dream? Well, the young boy in the dream was smiling enough for both of them. All 3 girls quieted, content to let him rest as they spoke and laughed in hushed tones as Eren napped on the bench. Eren woke up from his nap. Kaneko could tell by how his body tensed slightly, unconsciously reacting to a world he couldn't see. Her senses had always been more sensitive than the others, thanks to her heritage as a yakai and her affinity for. She bit into another cracker. "Who are you?" he asked in his accented Japanese. He was facing her direction but noticeably higher than her head's position. Kaneko frowned minutely. She still hadn't hit her growth spurt, but it was coming. Probably when she graduated middle school and into high school. Then she'd be tall, and her boobs would be bigger than Rias and Akeno's. She was sure of it. She had to pause slightly to finish the cracker in her mouth to answer. Her eating had probably been what woke Eren up from his nap. "Taoju Kaneko. Nice to meet you." After a beat, she decided to say a bit more to put him at ease. "You can speak English." Eren's muscles slightly eased, still tense, but not held on a knife's edge. His lips quirked. Not a smile, but something. Kaneko bit into another cracker. Elephant. She liked the idea of eating something so large in one bite. So she did. "Ria's friend?" Kaneko nodded once. Then she froze, the back half of a horse cracker in her mouth. This was going to be rough. "Yes." "What are you doing here, Kaneko?" "Watching you." "Why?" Buchu asked. "Buchu, that is? Club president?" "Yes." Eren sighed. It was so quiet and minute that most others would not have caught the exhalation of air from his mouth. Kaneko put the cat cracker back in the box and ate the dog cracker head first. She wasn't lying about Buchu asking her to come. She, Sona, and Akeno had apparently decided the teenage boy in front of her shouldn't be left alone after classes ended. They didn't want him to get lonely or something. There was some sort of schedule or rotation setup Kaneko was unaware of. Unfortunately, a stray devil had wandered into Kuo, and both Buchu and Akeno had decided it was safer for both of them to go. Sona was still occupied with the student council, so they had asked Kaneko to sit with and meet Eren and let him know they'd be late. Kaneko had agreed, not really caring. She had no clients tonight and planned to stay at the club to munch on snacks. Maybe visit Jaya-kun and play a game. Sitting on an uncomfortable bench while doing the same was no great sacrifice. She had honestly thought the smell would be the only hassle. Usually, sick people aggravated her sensitive senses. Open wounds, sweat-soaked clothes, or the smell of medication annoyed her sometimes. Erenyeager did not smell like any of that. He just smelled normal, really. He clearly bathed regularly, and his time in the park gave him the faint odor of grass, wind, and pollen. Even then, it was incredibly subtle. No overpowering smell of body spray, like so many of the boys in school. Kaneko sometimes wished she could punch people who thought deodorant replaced a shower. But Buchu would disapprove. Kaneko continued to munch away, lost in her own thoughts. Neither of the occupants of the bench were the most talkative of people, which suited Kaneko just fine. She was ready to kill another hour or so, waiting for her king and queen to find the stray, kill it, and return. From everything she had heard of Erenyeager, he would also continue to sit in silence. So when he asked her a question after long minutes of silence, she had to take a moment to swallow the rhino in her mouth before responding. "Do you enjoy it?" His voice was hesitant, almost awkward. The words came out in an unsteady rhythm like he was forcing them out. "Enjoy what?" "Your club, Rias and Akeno." He gestured vaguely in the direction of the school as if to try and explain with movement what his words couldn't convey. "Yes." "How about schooling? Do you like going to school?" Kaneko frowned minutely, trying to understand where this was coming from. Why was he being chatty? Akeno had told her he would be wary and cautious. Buchu said he wouldn't open up easily, and Kaneko would need to help him. She hadn't been sure she could, but had promised to try. "It's all right," she answered simply. "Boring. not too bad. That's good. And your club duties? The others complain about them. They aren't too bad, are they? Rias doesn't work you too hard. The words tumbled from his lips as if nervous energy pushed them out despite their lack of tonal inflection, like he didn't actually care and was just going through the motions, or fulfilling some duty he was unsuited for. Kaniko's frown deepened further. This didn't seem to be small talk like her classmates sometimes engaged in. What was going on with erenyeager? Was he trying to get information on the others through her, to make sure they didn't act differently behind his back? She knew of his past and could understand a certain level of paranoia, but she thought he was their friend. Buchu certainly seemed to think so, and Akeno generally had good things to say about him. No, Kaniko answered truthfully, but kept it at that. She only had a few clients and had plenty of free time. Rias provided everything she wanted. Her life was good. If he was searching for something bad about her family, she wouldn't give it to him. Kaniko might be younger than the others, but she wouldn't be tricked. Did you? Eren paused in his questions as if searching for the right words again. Kaniko corrected her earlier thoughts. His voice had been as monotone as hers this entire time, but he seemed strangely invested in her answers. Eventually, he settled on a question. You also went with them for the summer? Yes. You live with Ria's family? Yes. Are they kind to you? Yes. Are you happy? Kaniko froze, unable to keep up with the one-word answers she had been giving. Was she happy? Rias, Akeno, Yuyudo, and Jaya-kun were her friends. School, while annoying, was all right. She ate what she wanted to eat when she wanted to eat it. On the weekends, she'd nap through the afternoon in a cozy spot where the sun would warm her. She was strong, safe, and well cared for. But was she happy? Her mind flitted back to the nightmares. To two young girls, black and white, all alone against the world after they lost their mother. To long days of privation and starvation. To an older girl, swearing to be there for her, only to leave. To a small cell, trapped alone with nothing but her unwashed smell and nobody but herself, crying for anyone to tell her where her sister was. Was she happy? Yes. It took her a long moment to think it through, and Eren had made no movement to hurry her along, but she arrived at the answer she honestly thought was the truth. She still had nightmares, still woke up screaming for a sister who wasn't there or for release from the cell. She still feared Senjutsu and the effects it might have on her in the future. Kaniko was still afraid of being abandoned again. But here and now, she was happy. Her new family was kind. That is good. Again, only Kaniko's excellent senses allowed her to notice the faint sigh in Eren's voice. Was that relief in his voice? Envy? Wistfulness? She honestly couldn't tell. Kaniko tilted her head as she bit into a giraffe. Had she been wrong about why he was asking questions? If he wasn't looking for dirt on Rias, why ask all that? It took Kaniko a bit longer than she would have liked to realize what probably had happened. Erenyeager knew nothing about devils, nekashu, magic, or even the Gremory. He wasn't asking about Tauju Kaniko the rook, but the Tauju Kaniko the student. He was asking about her daily life. Erenyeager was a human boy asking about a life he would never have. An everyday life with school, clubs, friends, and family. A slight pang of sympathy echoed in Kaniko's heart. She wished she had said more than her one-word answers, that she was like Rias, Akeno, or Yuyudo and could talk to him at length. About how life, despite being hard and scary and lonely sometimes, was still fun. That he, too, could be happy. But Kaniko wasn't like the others, so she only did what she could. Do you want the penguin? Kaniko asked, holding out a cracker to the older boy. Eren tilted his head again, and Kaniko cursed internally again, realizing he couldn't see her offer. And he might not know what animal crackers were. This friendship thing was hard. Take the picture, take the picture, take the picture. The voice tumbled in a hurry. I did. Get another one? This is too cute, yep. A squeal that caused Kaniko to frown minutely and snuggle deeper. You're going to wake them up, the second voice chastised. But they're so, daha. Kaniko's frown deepened, wishing Akeno and Rias would let her sleep. I know, Akeno said with fondness in her voice. How'd she get so close? When I first met him, he threatened to punch me. PFFFT, you just aren't as cute as our Kaneko. Should you be saying that? Didn't he shake your hand away? That was a long time ago, Rias defended herself with pride. Just last week, I held his ha. Never mind, just keep taking pictures. Ara, I just heard something juicy. Have you decided to become a mistress after all? Should I tell Sona? Kaneko was full-on scowling now as she kept her eyes closed and buried her face deeper into the couch. Sometimes, she wished the older girls would be more like Yuyudo. It wasn't like they weren't reliable, but sometimes they got so caught up in their little games that they forgot about others in the room. The night, on the other hand, was a bastion of calm serenity. On days like this, Kaneko thanked the Satans that the two younger peerage members could simply sit on the uncomfortable couch together, her napping and he rubbing her hair. He was even kind enough to use the special soap that masked most of his scent because he knew she was sensitive. You can't bother me today, Rias said primly. I am too busy being overwhelmed by cuteness. If Gasper was here, it'd be perfect. They are quite adorable, Akeno admitted. Like an older brother and younger sister. Still, is this all right? For Kaneko to be like that? Don't worry about it. You haven't known him as long, but waking Eren from a nap is super hard. I suppose even if he does wake, it is not like he will see them. She must be really comfortable to let them out. Damn. Kaneko had accidentally let her ears and tail out in her sleep. Despite the seating, she was just so comfortable that it didn't seem worth it to go through the discomfort of hiding them again. Well, no, that wasn't true. The couch was way more uncomfortable than usual, but her pillow made up for it in spades. Even if having her racial traits out left her more sensitive to the various energies her race was known to manipulate, it was fine so long as she didn't reach out to the world around her. It can't be the bench. That thing is terrible. I have no idea how he sleeps on the thing. It has to be his lap. I'm jealous. Who knew Kaneko would get the famous lap pillow before all of us? Akeno giggled. My Kaneko is the cutest, and cuteness is justice. Didn't Lord Lucifer say the same thing about his Riatan this summer? Hush you. That never happened. Seriously, those two needed to leave, or keep it down. Relaxed and half-dozing, Kaneko tried to snuggle deeper. In her state, in that awkward realm between wakefulness and sleep, when she was at her most vulnerable, Kaneko's supernatural senses slipped the leash she usually kept in tight control. Like a fire, it blazed across her senses. "Ah!" she screamed in surprise, falling from the bench and to the ground as she rolled away. Kaneko! Kaneko! Rias and Akeno dashed to her fallen form, concern and worry written across their faces as they checked her for injuries. Kaneko paid them no mind, staring at the boy on the bench with wide eyes. What was that? He asked, sitting up from where he had been sleeping, Kaneko in his lap. Rias? Akeno? Kaneko? What happened? His hand rested on his cane, and he looked ready to stand and fight. Fine, Kaneko said hurriedly. I'm fine. Just fell. Eren remained tense, and Rias and Akeno continued to brush the dirt from her uniform as they checked her over. You fell? Eren asked with a frown, his empty hand raising slightly to his bandaged eyes before falling back to his cane. Are you hurt? No. She struggled to keep the emotions out of her voice as she stared at the older boy with dilated eyes. Kaneko, Rias whispered in her ear. Her cat ear. What happened? Quickly hiding her ears and tail, the middle schooler looked at the older girls and shook her head slightly. They couldn't talk about this here. Not with Eren here. When did you two get here? He asked the older girls. What time is it? Just now. I guess we woke Kaneko. Sorry for waking you, Akeno lied easily at Eren's question, sensing something off in Kaneko. It's a bit past 8, and the sun is setting. Do you need help getting home? I can do it, Eren said, but made no move to stand, instead relaxing back on the bench. You should head home. You still have school tomorrow, and staying out late isn't safe. Rias looked like she was about to protest, likely pointing out that the three of them would be much safer than he would, even discounting being devils. They were creatures of the night and stayed up much later than most teenagers could get away with without sleep withdrawals. Kaneko stopped her by tugging at her sleeve gently and giving her a pleading look. We were just picking up Kaneko before heading back, Rias said with a smile that Eren couldn't see. Sorry for missing today's appointment. I'll make it up to you tomorrow. You don't need to baby me, Eren frowned, but there was no heat in it. I am fine on my own. If stuff happens, you don't need to send someone to watch me. I am not going anywhere. We had an appointment, and I missed it. And we're almost done with battle tendency. I think you will like the next part a lot, so I will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow then, Eren said, giving up on changing the stubborn girl's mind. He nodded in their generation. It was nice meeting you, Kaneko. Yeah, you too. And me? Akeno said with a teasing lilt in her voice. Good night, Rias, Kaneko. Ooh, denial play. I like it. Come on, Kaneko said as she dragged Rias and the pervert away from the park, the bench, and its occupant. Good night, Eren, Rias called back, and the sick boy raised a hand and gently waved farewell toward them. Kaneko continued to drag the pair through the woods and to the clubhouse nearby, leaving Eren behind on the bench. Nobody said anything until they were well out of earshot of the young man. What happened, Kaneko? Rias asked gently, taking the younger girl's hand in her own. You're shaking. Another nightmare? No. How was she supposed to say this? Was she supposed to say anything? Was it Eren? Akeno asked with a concerned frown as she took her junior's other hand. Did he do something? He didn't do anything. In the end, Kaneko trusted her king and queen. I felt his life force. What? They both asked in confusion, but then Ria's eyes lit up in excitement. And, she asked eagerly, did you feel anything special? Some hidden bloodline or sacred gear? Magic? No. This question was easy to answer, as it was one she had looked into before. He's definitely human. No magic or sacred gear, I'm sure. It wasn't just a pitiful amount of magic, like some humans. Kaneko had not felt even a drop of magical potential in the boy. It was like he was magically disabled, which did happen sometimes. That meant he couldn't have a sacred gear, as they all had a magical component to them, even if only a tad. Rias's face fell, and Kaneko immediately felt terrible. She knew her king had been searching for any excuse she could find to make an offer to Eren to have him join her peerage. Still, she wouldn't lie. If it wasn't that, then he had a lot of life force, right? That's what surprised you. Kaneko nodded at Akeno's guess. That's good, Ria's fist pumped quietly. I can have my cousin train him. I hear he's been trying to attain Tauki recently. With Eren's experience and the chance he can gain Tauki, the family won't complain when I reincarnate him. You can't. I'm going to ask first, of course, Rias chuckled, rubbing Kaneko's hair gently. Eren would flip if he was forced into a peerage. I want to get him to trust me first so he'll agree. I was just worried about the repercussions. But this should be enough. Thank you, Kaneko. She looked so happy, as if a great burden had been lifted from her shoulders, that Kaneko regretted her next words as soon as they left her mouth. You can't, she repeated. You're too weak. Rias froze in place, hand resting on Kaneko's scalp in the middle of ruffling her hair. Kaneko felt her eyes water at the hurt in her king's eyes. She didn't want Rias looking at her like that. Kaneko, Akeno crouched slightly till she was at eye level with her junior and spoke softly. Dear, what do you mean? Rias might be a lazy weeb, but she's not weak. The Nekashu knew Akeno was trying to use humor to deflect, but it didn't change the truth. But how to explain it in a way they could understand? It's like a fire, she eventually said, speaking to both of them. Most people are candles. Yuyuto is like a fireplace. You two are bonfires. Buchu's is bigger. It was a testament to the situation that Rias didn't start immediately bragging about size to Akeno. And Eren? Remember the forest fire Surtur Roman II started 2 years ago? The one Ni-san tore into him about? Akeno remembered with a fond smile. That smile dipped. The one that burned down his entire territory? Eren felt like that? Rias asked with an intake of air. How? Kaneko shrugged, not having an answer to the question. She just knew what she felt. Can you compare it to anything else, dear? Akeno asked gently, and Kaneko gave it some real thought. She didn't keep her Kai senses open often, partly because it was only possible to get a really good sense of things when her ears and tail were out. but also because she was afraid it would leave her open to senjutsu and the malice of the world that drove her sister mad. So, she only had a few frames of reference to work from. Less than Nissan, Kaneko said with certainty, then continued with much less confidence. More than Lord Gremory? This was not an exact science by any means, and she was going by impressions more than anything. Both Akeno and Rias shared a look. Graphia Lucifuge was probably the second strongest female devil alive, so Eren being less powerful than her didn't say much. But Ria's father was firmly in the ultimate class, if on the lower end, for Eren's life force to rival his. Does he know Tauki? Rias asked, and Kaneko shrugged again. There was no way to tell if someone knew how to use their kai until they actually did. Even someone with only a little kai can use Tauki. Akeno shook her head and explained to her king. She was more familiar with the practice, thanks to her past studies. Having a lot of kai doesn't mean he can use it, just that finding it is easier, and once he does, it is more useful. The question is, how did he gain so much? If he was part yakai or had a sacred gear or something like it, it would be understandable. But a pure human. Eren exercises regularly when he gets home, Rias spoke aloud. I've had my familiar keep an eye on him occasionally when a stray is in the area. Despite his condition, he spends at least a few hours daily keeping up a demanding regime for a human. It is the only thing he does besides sit on the bench. It's why he's still in decent shape. That isn't enough, Akeno shook her head, not even commenting on Ria's use of her familiar to keep an eye on a young man. Some humans have more kai than others, but nothing like Kaneko saw. Not without access to some sort of mystic art. A few hours of exercise isn't enough to make up that difference. To even have a hope of gaining that much life force at that age, he'd need training from a senin or a similar teacher and years of effort. He's meditating, Kaneko said with realization, the queen's words tickling her brain to memories of her older sis. To Kuroka learning her own kai arts. When he's on the bench, he's meditating. Unconsciously? Rias asked with disbelief. Humans meditating was nothing new, but doing so in a way to channel or raise their kai without instruction was practically unheard of. Maybe not, Akeno, too, had a moment of realization. His second-in-command in his mercenary company was Chinese if I remember right, and others were from cultures with mystic traditions that merged with regular humans. The Citri agents didn't find anything supernatural in his past, but it is possible he learned proper meditation techniques without knowing how to consciously use the kai. If all he does is meditate and exercise, it is theoretically possible for a human to reach kai levels comparable in magnitude, if not usage, to an ultimate class. It would take an insanely gifted genius to do it at his age, but it is possible. That still doesn't make sense, Rias said, biting the tip of her nail in frustration. If he has that much life force, he shouldn't be dying. That Kaneko did have an answer for. Strong, but limited. She struggled to put what she had felt into words. The forest is running out of trees. Or, fire isn't getting air. What she had felt had been incredibly bright to her senses, but not spread. In fact, it had been tightly contained. Kaneko was a Nekashu, a variant race of Nekomata which were themselves a race of yakai supernaturally gifted with talents in the sage arts, and she hadn't felt any of his prodigious kai when Rias first asked her to investigate him. It was only because she had been touching Eren directly, with her ears and tail out, that she felt it. Like a sun trapped in a glass ball. And that ball was shrinking as his body gave out. Only a few hundred feet from that sun, Kaneko could sense nothing special about the boy. Kai was not a cure-all, nor was having a significant source of vital energy a guarantee of a long life. People with Kai would still get sick and would still die from disease, poison, or even age. Their life might be strong, but their body might not be. In real life, Kai was not like it was in Dragon Ball or other media. Erenyeager could have all the Kai in the world. All it would do was delay the inevitable if his body failed. Ria's finger was bleeding, she was biting its tip so hard. If Kaneko only sensed it now, it would explain how the Citri servants missed it. Akeno continued to piece the puzzle together. And why no other devil or faction has come to snatch him up. Is there any way he can learn to use his kai to heal himself? Rias asked both of them, a bit of desperation leaking into her voice. Akeno looked at the rook, but Kaneko shook her head slightly. It is his body, she explained. It shouldn't be this way, but it is. He's already doing everything but is still sick. Kai can't help, or it would have. Sickness, not injury. Internal, not external. Kaneko didn't need to tell them that it was probably only thanks to his prodigious life force that Eren had managed to stay alive this long. If he didn't have that internal reservoir of power he was unconsciously using, his body would have shut down long ago. How young would he have been when he died without it? 10? 12? Kaneko could not imagine he would have survived to 14 if all his Kai could do was keep him going till 19. But she did not need to speak those grim words to the older girls. Both of them had probably guessed as much. If we could move his soul to a new body, it would fix the problem at the root, Akeno postulated. But the only thing that can do that is the Sephiroth Grail, which hasn't appeared in generations. Counting on the appearance of one of the 12 Longinus in this generation was wishful thinking in the extreme. The world's factions always kept a close eye on them when they showed up, and the last time the Grail appeared was decades ago. And even if a user did appear in the time they had left, they would need to find them, convince them to help Eren, and create a body for him. Okay, Rias said to herself, pacing along the dark path back and forth as she continued to chew her nail. Okay. Should we? Tell Lord Lucifer, Akeno asked delicately, knowing how much Rias valued her independence from her family and brother. No. Rias was firm in her denial, and when Akeno made to insist, she continued. I don't think he can help. Think about it. We are already looking for a way to heal Eren and aren't going to stop. All that has changed is that we know Kai doesn't work and how much potential Eren has now. Potential we cannot let anyone know about. Ever. Akeno pursed her lips but nodded, seeing the point. If other high-class devils learned that there was someone like Eren, a once-in-centuries genius with the potential to be a Senin, was currently weak and vulnerable in the human world. If anyone forcibly reincarnates him, he'll go stray instantly. Rias nodded sharply at Akeno's words. Everything she knew about the older boy told her he would rather die than give up his freedom. He had said as much to Sona and her on different occasions. That was why she had initially simply planned to make his last few years fun. Her plans had shifted since then, unwilling to let her friend die if she could help it. But she still wasn't going to reincarnate him against his wishes. Anyone able to turn him will be the peak of high class or ultimate class at the very least. If he goes stray, which he will, they'll kill him instantly before he can grow into his potential. He'll start weak because of his condition, Kai or no Kai. The greater his potential, the more risk he's in and the quicker they'd kill him. Sorry, Kaneko apologized, feeling terrible that her inattention had inadvertently put Eren in danger. No, Rias hurried to reassure her rook, drawing the young girl into a tight hug. Us knowing about it is a good thing. It's an excellent thing. It'd be too late if we didn't learn about it till later. We still have time now. Time for what? Akeno asked. Time for me to make ultimate class. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 3. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Reading Dangerously FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.